What is a sales funnel? This is a sales funnel. The funnel is used by businesses to move leads through the stages of their sales process. At the end of the process, those who have been moved through the funnel become customers or clients. This is a sales funnel that is not well maintained. This is a well-maintained sales funnel. Prospects enter the top, and what comes out the other end is an organized, manageable stream of perfect customers. Managing your sales funnel is called sales cycle management, and it is vital to the growth of your business and sets you up to close more sales. Managing your sales funnel can be a lot of work, but software like Keap makes sales cycle management, well, manageable. Sales cycle management rests on selling to the perfect customer. But who is the perfect customer? Maybe for your business, the perfect customers are women between the ages of 34 and 45, located in North America. Those that are left are perfect customers. Getting the right prospects in your sales funnel is only half of good sales funnel management. Next is to move them through your sales process using automation. Nurturing is how you develop prospects into customers. If a prospect isn't ready to buy, a drip email program is an effective way to nurture them until they are ready to buy. Your sales automation software will tell you when your leads open or don't open your drip emails and how your prospects are interacting with your business. Sales cycle management is a proven process that turns leads into customers. That process also extends beyond the sale. Follow up with helpful messages and offers to transform one-time buyers into loyal customers and advocates. Check out our blog for more about the benefits of automating a sales funnel and other videos like this.
A lot of marketing for info products, and now they're getting into marketing their own info product.
Oh,
so.
Okay, cool. All right, well, thanks for being here.
Yeah.
Hey everybody, it's Clate, co-founder and CEO of Keap. Thank you for being here with us. It's going to be a lot of fun. We're going to talk today about the challenges to growing sales in your business and some secrets on how to make that happen. So I want to introduce to you our guest today, Brendan Allan Barrett. Great to have you with us, Brendan.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So tell us a little bit about yourself. You're the founder of Start in Phoenix, Start in PHX.
Yeah, startinphoenix.com.
Tell us a little bit about that and a little bit about your background.
Sure. Yeah, startinphoenix.com is a hub for content on best practices in sales and sales leadership. So both the folks who are carrying the bag or carrying the quota and those leading those folks. It's also home to my podcast, The Business of Family and Selling. So again, best practices in sales and sales leadership, but more specifically for folks who want to focus on the folks at the dinner table come 5 o'clock rather than the phone that's ringing off the hook. So yeah, startinphoenix.com.
Well, great. Well, I'm excited about having you here so you can share your wisdom and the things that you've learned in sales. The reason why we wanted to tackle this topic, the challenges of growing sales in your business is, I see entrepreneurs all the time. I know you do too. They've got a product they're really excited about. They've got a service, a solution that they offer, and they're disappointed by their sales, and they struggle. They're frustrated, and one of the biggest things I see is entrepreneurs getting that first sales hire right. It can make all the difference between that company being successful or going out of business.
Yeah.
So at every step along the path as you grow your business through the stages of business growth, which we talk about all the time, there's a new sales challenge associated with it. So
absolutely.
I wanted to talk a little bit about that. It's also something that's very near and dear to my heart because I remember in the early days of growing our business, learning how to get sales right was critical, and we had a lot of starving nights, trying to make it work. Months where it was so lean, for really, I tell people all the time, for like the first 3 years, it was a daily fight for survival. Every single day, whether or not we were going to be around. And during those 3 years, I learned some things about sales that became really important. And if I hadn't learned those, we would have gone away. There's no doubt about it. So tell us maybe a little bit about your background. You've talked about, Start in Phoenix, but tell us a little bit about your background that gives you such interest in sales.
Well, I think we'll touch on a couple of these different things, like as you progress in your career or through the life cycle of your business, like there's different challenges along the way. like early stage solopreneur starting out, getting the idea off the ground, like a lot of those folks are struggling with something that I think is inherent to all of us. This idea that sales is icky, it's loathsome.
Right.
Like I grew up I grew up the son of a union carpenter outside of Chicago. Like in our household, salesman was a 4-letter word. I definitely didn't aspire to be a salesperson growing up. But as the years have progressed, like I tiptoed my way into sales, first through an interest in business and economics, then into, deciding, well, if I get my degree in economics, I probably have to go to grad school, and I don't know if I really want to do any more school right now. So transitioning into public relations and communications, like for me, it was like, if I'm going to get into business, I'm going to start something of my own, I'm probably going to have to learn how to communicate that. See, I wasn't even saying sales back then.
Right.
I'm going to have to learn how to communicate that thing and get it in front of the right people. And to me, like public relations was influencing the people who influence buyers, which was sales, but it was kind of undercover.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm tiptoeing my way into it, and now I'm working with businesses of all sizes, helping them get the right sales hires, helping them generate more leads, helping them get over some of these mindset issues of how much follow-up is too much follow-up, and what's the frequency of it supposed to be, and then systematizing that so that you can bring in people who have the grit and the attitude and the aptitude so that they can be successful. Because getting people to a level of perceived success, whether you're the business owner or somebody hired by the business to function in that sales role, right? Like it's key to just keeping people on the path and excited about doing what you're trying to do as an organization.
Yes.
So I guess the Brendan that you see here is a very different Brendan than kid growing up outside of Chicago who again had no aspirations about selling, being a salesperson. Now I'm excited about it. I'm excited about helping other people find success as business owners, as leaders in the business, and as individual sales contributors.
Okay, great. So thank you for giving a little bit of background. We're gonna draw upon that expertise and that experience in a minute. But I want to make sure that for people who are watching and they're participating in this and they're saying, I don't really want to talk about sales. I think what I would say is the reality is you want your business to be successful. You want to grow your business, and all too often we think that that's going to happen because we have a better product or a better solution, a better thing that we offer. And we don't really take responsibility for how to make sure that sales are effective.
Well, and so one thing that I hear a lot, and I hear a lot of folks, especially here in the Valley, but elsewhere, talk about like early stage business, whether it's a solopreneur or whether it's the first 3, 4, 5 people that are making up this team that will eventually be something else. Biggest issue is, we just need to get the word out.
Right.
So you need help with sales. No, we just need to get the word out. Like you're talking about sales. Like sales is a function of marketing. Like it's one and the same. Like the marketing department's their number one customer is sales.
Yeah.
And if you're a small organization, it's all one thing. You need opportunities, and you need a way to turn those opportunities into revenue.
Right. Yeah. And a lot of times business owners will get so into the work that they're doing on their product or their service, and they're working with their customers, they're working with their clients to serve them well. And sales feels like a distraction. It's like, I got to go do that. Somebody's going to take care of that.
Well, and then what happens, right? You see the peaks and the valleys, right? It's feast or famine.
Right.
When things are good, and when they're not so good, you're taking projects you shouldn't be taking, and that distracts you from building the business maybe you set out to build.
That's right. So the reason we wanted to talk is because we don't want our business owners we care so much about to be missing their goals. We don't want you to be frustrated by the hard work that you're doing and then not get the rewards of that work. And we don't want those ups and downs, feast and famine. We're sitting here at the end of the year. There may be a person or two watching who hasn't hit their sales goals the way they wanted to.
Maybe just a few, right?
Just a few. And we're getting ready to start this new year. How will 2020 be different? We wanted to spend some time and let's talk about sales in a way that we think can set our listeners, our audience up for success next year.
Sure.
So as we jump into this, I got to tell a little story. I haven't told you this, but I think this is something that I have a bit of a pet peeve with entrepreneurs who talk about the goals and ambitions and the things they want to accomplish, but they shy away from sales. And the reason is that they all too often tell themselves, well, I'm going to hire somebody to do that. But if they don't first learn how to communicate effectively the value that they've created, the chances of somebody else coming in and just like getting it right,
Yeah.
the entrepreneur who's hoping for that is dreaming. Like that doesn't happen. And so what I see over and over, and it pains me to see friends who go through this. Well, I do this part. I'm going to hire this salesperson to come in. I'm not saying you have to be world's best salesperson if you're an entrepreneur, but you do have to be able to convince someone that they should get your product or service because it's valuable.
Well, there's an interesting crossroads there, right? Because like if you want to be owner, you want to be the sole leader. That's one conversation. If that's the case, if that's who you've decided to be, you need to learn how to sell. Because you are never, unless you know how to sell and have experience being in that trench, you have no appreciation for the real struggle that is writing the first sales playbook, doing the testing on scripts and follow-up cadences and frequencies to figure out, how long is our sales cycle? Can it be shorter? Who should we be targeting? What talk tracks work when we get a live person who, has raised their hand and says they have a problem and they're willing to spend some money? Like early days, it's all research and development, right?
That's right?
And if you don't appreciate that because you've just tried to subcontract it out, you're setting yourself up for some missed goals simply because you didn't have the right expectation when you set those goals.
And when you say research and development, what you mean is making calls, right? You're talking to people, right? The fact is, if you're not willing to have those conversations and put yourself out there with your product or service, you're not going to do the research and development. You're not going to learn what it takes. And what I've seen far too often is you get a business owner that says, okay, you know what, I'm going to hire this salesperson. They think that salesperson is going to come in and solve the problem, solve the sales problem, but the business owner is not clear enough on what they've created and what the value is. And so you spend months paying this person and time's going by and you're frustrated and you eventually say, well, this person can't sell. When the reality is, and I say this with all the love and care and concern for our business owners that are watching, but the reality is you haven't taken the time to get clear on the value that you offer. Because there are all sorts of things that you as the business owner don't need to do in a more sophisticated sales experience with process and measures and all that stuff. We can get to that in a minute. But the basics, like the very beginning of it, is being able to persuade someone who is a good fit for your product or service that they should get your product or service. So let me tell you a little bit about this. So this is early days in our business. We were struggling like crazy. I mean, it was me and 3 software developers, and the deal was it was my job to do everything except write software, and it was their job to do nothing but write software. That's the way it was. So that meant I was sales, and I was okay with that ish. I was like, okay, I kind of thought, well, I had been to a lot of college. I did economics and an MBA. And by the way, in business school, there was no sales course. Nobody talked about sales. We talked about marketing and product and operations. Didn't talk about sales. But I knew enough to say I got to figure out how to sell this. So I was trying to sell, and back then it was custom software. I was trying to sell our custom software projects. And we would do pay-per-click advertising, and I would work those leads, and I had kind of a method of how I worked my pipeline, and I would have these conversations, and I had all these people that were getting so close, but they weren't buying. And I was fit to be tied, because we were dying. Like this was not, oh, we've got a bunch of venture capital. For anybody who knows Keap and Infusionsoft, you might be like, oh, well, you had all this money. No, we didn't. We bootstrapped this thing for several years before we ever raised capital. And so, we had no food on the table, literally. We were literally starving. And we'd kind of drawn this line in the sand where we said, okay, we've got to start, everybody's looking at me saying, Clate, you got to start selling by this point. I'm like, okay. And we got to that point, we still hadn't been selling. And I was really struggling. I went over to my dad one day and I said, I need help. I need you to and my dad's a teacher. And in his early career, he had done insurance sales. And so I knew he had a little bit of sales in him, and I said, look, I need help. And long story short, we were talking one day and he said, why don't you tell me what you do in your conversations with these prospects that are right there? Because I'm like, they're just right there, Dad. He's like, why don't you tell me what you do? So I said, okay. So I kind of take him through, a hypothetical conversation with one of my prospects. And he says, okay, you ready? And I said, yeah. He goes, sell! He goes, I said, I am selling. He goes, no, you're not. You're talking to them, but you're not selling them on why they should go with your custom software. And it totally shook me. Like he literally yelled at me, like, louder than I did even. And it rocked me because I was like, well, I think I have been selling. And he started to talk through it with me and he said, no, you're doing everything to like protect them from making the wrong decision. You're not coming at it from, you have this confidence that what you have is going to make their lives better. And it was the very first lesson I got, that I was not being persuasive in my conversations with them. I was telling them about a bunch of different things. And I've looked back on that experience, gosh, what's it been, 16, 17 years now.
Yeah.
And I think that is a common pitfall that business owners fall into, is they don't confidently, persuasively offer to the world what they have.
Well, and there's some key components to that, right? Because there's one thing to pitch, and I think that's what turns a lot of people off from selling, is that people talk about features and benefits, but if you're not focusing on the features and benefits of those features that matter to this particular prospect, then you're not going to do a deal,
right?
Right.
And if I'm saying, but my dad's point was, you got this prospect that's right there. You're not talking to the world and giving a loud, bombastic message to the masses. You've actually got a prospect that's down right to the point of trying to decide and keeps putting you off and isn't quite sure. And it's because you're not coming through confidently saying, this is what we're going to do for you when you hire us for this project.
Well, and what's the secret of confidence? To me, it's discovery. You keep asking questions, and then they basically give you the script. They tell you what they care about, what's going to work for them, what they're afraid of, and through that you can link to the features, benefits that actually matter to these people. Because of all the things that you could have said, focus on 1, 2, 3 that they care about. And
because
now
they told you they care about it.
And now it's a no-brainer, right? Like if you do your targeting right, you do your qualifying, and you're continuing to qualify through discovery. Like once you get down to it, and especially like if it's custom software, right? Like there's a lot of variables.
Right.
But with all those variables, I mean, you're coming down basically to hours. How long is it going to take my team to build this thing and get it to a point that they can use it and get the value out of it they're looking for? Right? Like if you've done that job thoroughly, like given the price, the next logical step is, okay, let's start. Right?
So often when I say entrepreneurs don't make their offer, it's they literally don't ask for the business. They don't ask for the sale.
Gotta ask for
it. So you learn, and I learned early on, I started, by the way, I got that lesson from my dad. I began to apply it. We did start making custom software sales, and then we gradually moved into our CRM products, our software. And as we started to do that, I began to recognize, wow, once you have a product, now it gets a little easier than you have a project that you're trying to sell. Now you've got a product that has a price, and yet a lot of times what I found is that business owners, they'll have that, but they won't actually ask for the business. They're like, oh, it's there. You're aware of the price, instead of like, okay, are you ready to invest this amount today so we can help you accomplish X, A, B, and C, which you learned in the discovery, right? And I find that even after I learned the first lesson, there was a point where I was going through where I had to get really good at just asking for the business, and in a very confident, direct, straightforward way. And I think a lot of times entrepreneurs, business owners have a hard time getting to that point. Because they know all of the problems and the challenges and all the issues that are going on in the background. Am I going to be able to deliver for this? They know all of those things, and it causes them to not be confident.
Absolutely, but here's the other thing too. Like once you get to asking for the business, stop. Just be quiet. Hush. Like it's cost this much. Let's give it a shot.
Right.
And then give them the space to connect all the dots you presented to them and walk across the finish line of the conclusion you just led them up to. It has to feel like their idea, or they're not going to do it. If they feel like you're bending their arm or trying to jam a square peg into a round hole, they're going to resist, they're going to flee. But if you give them the room to make a decision that you've led them up to based on what they fed you in your discovery, right? Like, you don't need to continue to talk. Because what happens when you do talk, all of that self-doubt, that imposter syndrome, it just vomits all over that beautiful opportunity of a sale that you created, and it slowly goes away.
Okay. All right. So that's great. Like, ask for the business and pause. Let it sit. Right. Let them connect the dots. As you said, let them be their conclusion that they get to. So I want to hit one more thing, one more psychological barrier that I see as we talk about the challenges of businesses growing and growing their sales. one of the things that I see over and over is, you touched on at the beginning, you have this psychological thing that, well, sales is kind of, it's not like, it's kind of beneath me, or it's not something I want to do. And everybody's had a number of bad sales experiences. So what would you say to the business owner to get them in the right mindset to confidently and effectively sell their products and services without being caught up on their images of the used car salesman or the telemarketer that is beating them down or whatever, fill in the blank of the bad sales experience that they've had? How do you help them get out of that mindset and recognize sales is it's a great thing? You're serving the customer. How do you do that?
Well, so it's funny. You kind of trick yourself into it, I think, right? through leading with questions, right? Just like your discovery, like that starts way before like they've raised their hand, they've given you permission to enter a sales dialogue. Like when you're prospecting, whether you're actually picking up the phone or sending emails or going out to events or following up with people who've submitted a form, following your pay-per-click ad, whatever it happens to be, like leading with questions. All of a sudden, like the dots become very apparent to you.
Yeah.
Right. Like you can only connect the dots looking back, but ask the questions. That information, the reasons for why they should do business. Right. Like I mean, if it helps, write it out. Right. Like what are the problems people are experiencing that your solution solves?
Okay. So you talk about you say discovery. Some people understand what that is. Some people don't understand what that is. But you're saying the way that you get your mind right about selling is you start asking people questions about what their frustrations are, what are their challenges. And I think that's a really good point, because a lot of times when people hear, you're gonna, I'm trying to say, look, you've got to own this responsibility you have to sell. And if I say that and people they don't want to sell, they may not recognize that what I'm saying and what you're sharing here is, find the pain, find the problem, discover what it is. And discovery is a term in sales that means something very specific. But you're finding how you can serve them. You're finding out what's ailing them, what's
who I can serve and how I can serve them, right? Because even if I do have a product, that product is going to mean different things to different people. But
and this is the R&D, by the way. You're having these conversations, learning.
Absolutely.
Here's how I can be helpful.
Because like when you're multiple stages through, you're a larger business. Now we're talking about buyer personas. Early days, you're trying to figure out who those buyer personas are, right? But I mean,
you're trying to figure out, is there a buyer?
Like, are you, if you're selling to businesses, are you the type of business that does this thing? Cool, you do that thing. Do you guys ever experience this? How do you overcome that challenge? What does that mean to, your revenues or, your employee retention, whatever that problem, that you solve, it's small little questions. And with each question, you're a step closer to either qualifying them or disqualifying them. And the reality is, not everybody's your customer, right? You may have many different types of customers, but at the same time, not everybody will be your customer. And it's okay to stop the conversation if there's no logical reason they would do business.
Okay, let's pause on that one for a second, because one of the challenges of growing sales is that you have a tendency to want to take whatever's willing, take the business if it's willing to come into you, right? So, and I certainly, when I say this, I understand the challenges of trying to keep the lights on in the early days. Like, I understand this, okay? But you also can really hurt yourself by bringing business in that is distracting you from what you're good at, or that really isn't going to solve the problems for the customers, the expectation of what they have and what you're able to deliver. There's a huge gap there. So any words of advice on, when you're, I'm going to ask you two ways. One, which is kind of a clear answer, when you think there's a big gap in your in what the customer expects you can deliver and what you think you're able to deliver. Or maybe stated a better way, what you're able to deliver efficiently. Because you can take on business that you can deliver, but you're going to have to do all kinds of gymnastics to make it work. Right?
And a $10,000 sale could cost you $50.
Exactly. Right? So there's the question of bringing in bad business in that sense, and I think we could all say, just don't do it. Like
easier said than done.
It is. Boy, it's easier said
tempting.
than done. Yes. What about the one where there's a little gap, and you're like, okay, I think this is going to work. Where do you sort of determine, I'm going to bring this in knowing there's a little bit of risk there versus I'm going to bring this in and it's like hand in glove fit, it's going to be it's going to be perfect.
I mean, honesty, right? Like sometimes your solution, your product is not the full fit to their particular problem, right? And so as a sales professional, cool, I could bring in one of my colleagues who has a solution that helps fill the rest of that gap, and now they've got a well-rounded solution, a well-rounded solution to the problem that they're experiencing. So, I mean, that's one easy way to do it. But yeah, if you're not setting proper expectations, if you're just telling the people what they want to hear,
yes, right,
you're setting yourself up for issues and potentially
failure. This is critical. When there's a little gap, the point is close the gap at point of sale.
Yeah.
Share with them what you can do, what you can't do, how a partner might be able to help, or something like that. But in that case, it doesn't mean you can't bring in the business. It means you got to close the gap at the point of sale. Because if you don't do that, that gap's going to just it's going to explode on you later, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's go to another challenge that I hear all the time. You know, as we're talking about these challenges of growing sales in your business, what I like to think, and I've shared this before, I like to think about the stages of business growth, and sales is instrumental in each stage of the growth. Obviously, you don't grow without sales. You know, somebody really smart one time said nothing happens until somebody sells something, right? So as you go through the stages of growth, the sales challenges change.
Yes.
When you're a solopreneur, you realize, okay, I got to figure out how to convey this. Then you start to, you have an employee or two, somebody needs to be good at sales. But as the business starts to grow, things change. Now it can't just be in the mind of the one person who sells. You got to start getting it out of the mind. You got to start to create process. And I know this is a big part of what you do. So for the business that's got 3 or 4 employees, maybe one person is not just a sales specialist anymore. Now you have maybe another person that's starting to learn how to sell and do some of that work. By the way, I see this very commonly in the owner-operator business, where the owner was the salesperson initially, but now they're getting spread so thin, they need to hire a person who really does sales. And this challenge is, I hate to say it so dramatically, but it's almost make or break for the business, because you're going to spend that business owner is going to spend a lot of money on the salesperson, and if you get it right, quote unquote, the business is going to continue to grow effectively. But if you get it wrong, it can really hurt the business, and it might even put the business out, put you out of business.
Well, there's a lot of pressure to make those first sales hires. They're super critical. I often think though that people some of the best practices as a leader in delegation, they apply to this situation as well, right? What is the first thing that when it comes to sales that people shy away from, that a technical founder maybe hates? It's the early part of the sales conversation. If there's a problem that they can actually solve, they're excited about that conversation, right? They're ready to play doctor and find a way to—
the sales engineer job.
Yeah, exactly, right? But those, going out and meeting strangers or calling strangers on the phone or, that can be nerve-wracking, that's scary, and it's tedious.
Well, yeah, let's be honest, it's usually not it's usually not the best use of the business owner's time. And yet, if you don't do some of that, you might not ever get it off the ground. But let's assume you got it off the ground.
Yeah, so top of funnel is important, but rather than try to, especially if you've got a 2-meeting sales process, right? That means maybe you could include 2 people, right? Maybe instead of hiring 1 salesperson, you could hire 2 sales development reps, right? Who are just focusing on qualifying people in and qualifying people, getting attention, winning permission to sell, and qualifying people in or out, right? That's a simple thing. It can be learned relatively quick in terms of the larger sales process, and then they can field those qualified opportunities up to somebody who has greater knowledge on the sales process, on the product, and who can maybe as founder wing it a little bit. And again, as they start to bring themselves out of those early sales conversations into the later sales conversations, can continue to build out that playbook, because now they have more at bats at just that part. Right.
Yeah. I think that's a really great point. And my heart goes out to that business owner that's in that tricky situation where they're getting ready to invest in a sales rep. They know it's going to take a while before that rep's productive. But the thing that I see when I see business owners stumble on this, It's that they hire the sales rep and they think, okay, good, this person's going to solve the problem. But they don't take the time to unpack the process that's in their head, the things that they have figured out over time, to slow it down, sit with them, be side by side for a period of time, because they want all too much to get rid of that sales process and pawn it off onto the person, instead of working with them and getting them to a point where they can take the baton and run with it.
So there's two important principles there. One is that, like, as leader of the organization, your job just becomes more, your main responsibilities, I think, just become more and more driving sales, right? You never leave it, right? You delegate aspects of it, but here you are creating content for the internet.
Hey, I guarantee, I guarantee you that my board thinks that I'm responsible for revenue.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. The other part of that is, well, we've got, totally lost my train of thought. What were we talking about? We were
so the business owner that sometimes doesn't slow down and unpack the process and get it out of their head.
So the other part of it is, like, if you start to delegate aspects of the sales process rather than the entire sales process all at once, you have less to unpack, less of a playbook to write. But leadership does require face time. That's the reality.
And so
there are some things that you have to learn through osmosis, like sitting next to each other, making the connecting the dots of the finer details to make sure that they fully understand what you put into a playbook or you told them through a recorded video through training.
Right. Sometimes you can't see it when you're the business owner and your business is starting to grow and you're hiring that first salesperson. You can't see it from that vantage point, but you would see it later. And the point is that when you are hiring a person for a function, you're still the leader of the function.
Yes.
And that's true whether you're hiring for marketing or whatever it is. It's part of why it's so dang hard for business owners and they're wearing so many different hats, because you really are still responsible as the business owner for the marketing, the accounting, the finance, the sales, the product, the service. You're still responsible for it. But you've got an individual who reports to you that is taking the day-to-day actions of that. But you're still the leader of it. Yeah. And I think the thing that
your responsibility never goes away.
Yeah, it doesn't. It doesn't. When you get the sales leader, then you can back off a little bit, and now that leader's reporting to you. Like I said, ultimately, you hundreds of employees, but I'm still responsible for their
leadership.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. So. By the way, the day that I got to hire a sales and marketing leader that I had great confidence in, where I could allow him to lead, but I would still, I didn't absolve the responsibility of sales. I wasn't absolved of the responsibility of sales, but I was able to let him run with it. Yeah. That was a beautiful thing. But it took a while. We had a few successful sales reps at that point. Sure. And but when he came in, that was, to this day, I still say that was the single greatest hire in the company, because that was the point where we went from about $1 million in sales to about 10 to 12 million in sales. And I had someone that I had total confidence and trust in. He led sales and marketing, and it took a huge weight off of my shoulders. Again, I still was ultimately responsible, but I was not in the day-to-days, and he was the one that was making sure that the process was being followed, that we had all of the collateral that the sales reps need, that we had a demo that worked out. He did all of those things, and it was awesome. It was just so fun to watch the business grow through that stage. And I always wish for that when I'm talking to an entrepreneur that's like so stretched. They're just like, they're dying because they're carrying. They might have a salesperson or two, or even a marketing person, but they're still carrying so much of the weight of the sales and marketing effectiveness. And when you can get to that point, you get a leader that builds the process, that does that. Well, it is game-changing.
And that's the reality. If you're founder, like, trying to delegate the entire sales process and the creation of that first sales playbook, like, that's a six-figure job. Yeah. Like, they've got some experience, they've played that game before, they know what success looks like early on, they know which avenues to continue to pursue and which to say, no, we need to go in a different direction without chasing shiny objects. Yes. Like, that takes some experience, that takes some expertise. So to bring a recent college grad, who has a couple of courses in marketing and say, you're our first sales guy, go get him, right? Like, that's just crazy. That person needs years of mentorship to be just successful as an individual contributor, and then years of mentorship and leadership.
Right. I'm so glad you said that, because the main reason that I see that an entrepreneur, and I'm talking about a business that's growing, maybe they're getting to 7 figures. The business is growing and doing well, and it's not. There's a couple of successful salespeople frequently in that situation, but it's time for sales management, sales leadership. And a lot of times what I see is the business owner is not willing to invest at the level they need to bring that person in. They want to go on the cheap, and I say this with all the love and care and concern that I have for you, because I understand it's coming out of your pocket, right? I get that. So I understand that that's the reality. But the problem is if you don't actually make that level of investment, you have this expectation that you're going to be able to get out of that work. But you're not willing to pay what you need to in order to be able to get out of that work. And that's where you get really, really frustrated as a business owner, because you're still stuck in that work, wanting to not be there, to be able to be freed up to work on other things, but you just can't because you don't have the level of expertise that you have to pay for to have. So
absolutely.
I'm glad you called that out on the 6-figure thing. That's a very real thing. And it's hard, I'm telling you. I remember when we paid our first 6-figure leader, my co-founders and I, we were paying him more than we paid ourselves. But we did that because we had the equity and the ownership of the business, and it was painful. And I remember sitting at Rubio's with my 2 co-founders saying, listen, we need to bring this person on, and they're like, there's no way, we'll be paying him more than we're paying ourselves.
And the other reality is that experienced sales leaders, they know that in a VP role plus, most of those roles last less than a year and a half. So if you're promising them equity at year 3, 4, 5, they know they might not be there that long. They're not taking it. They want cash today.
Right. You tend to have to pay the sales leader in cash, I found.
Yeah.
So they don't buy into the equity as much. But what happened for us was they finally said, okay, if it does, because they were actually afraid, well, what if it doesn't work, then we can't pay ourselves. They were. This is a great comment on my co-founders. They were okay with paying somebody more than us. They were just not sure we would be able to pay ourselves what we were paying. So I ended up saying, listen, if he doesn't perform, I'll be the first to take the hit on pay. Because I believed in this guy. I believed he would do a great job, and it was the best bet I've made. It was really good. So, yeah, it's interesting though how you have to get into that uncomfortable zone of paying, which makes it all the more painful if it doesn't work out. It's tough. Okay, so we've talked about some of the challenges that happen in the early stages. Now let's talk about sales management for a second, because whether it's the business owner that's doing the sales management or a sales manager that might be watching, there are some key things that you need to do to get the team effectively following a process and getting a great return on the marketing investments that you're making on the leads and opportunities that are coming into the business. So talk to us a little bit about process, about the things that an effective sales manager does that maybe the business owner or an early sales manager is missing that would be helpful for them to build that sales function.
So proximity is one, right? I know some people who are doing killer things with entirely virtual sales teams. The important key to that is they're still doing a morning stand-up. They're still face-to-face via Zoom or Skype or something, right? So that there's constant communication. Because if you don't have that standard, that time, that proximity, when there is a problem, those sales reps are going to recede. They're going to keep it up, and they're not going to bring it up until their exit interview because they found another gig. They're chasing greener grass. So, frequency in training. The other part is room to give the reps, because there's 2 extremes. There's sales management that is not frequent enough. Just these are the numbers. Hit your number. Why aren't you hitting your number? Did you call that guy? Right. And then there's the other extreme of we've got a 1 hour more meeting 1 hour meeting in the morning, and all these guys they've got energy, they've got 6 cups of coffee in them, they're chomping to get on the phone, let them go get on the phone. So there are 2 extremes, because sales reps need time to do their work. And as the company grows, you may find top performers who are making excuses not to show up to meetings just so they can get their job done, right? And so there are 2 extremes to that proximity and that frequency in coaching. Being available is important. Having a process and sticking to that process is important. Just like raising kids, right? If the rules change every day or every week, nobody's going to follow any of them.
Yep.
Right? And
Yep.
so, like, as the business grows, again, you're going to continue to go through this research and development and adaptation of the process based on the data you're receiving from executing. It's the scientific method. If each test isn't done similarly enough, your data is garbage and you can't make any decisions.
Right. And so as a sales manager, you start to run those tests and you get your people executing based on what's working well in those tests. But you said something really important in that, which was consistency. So you need that consistency, and yet sometimes you are doing a bunch of R&D. So I hear the audience saying, well, look, how do you stay consistent when you're trying to learn all this stuff? You're doing tests, you're doing R&D. How do you do that? How do you provide that level of stability that we know the sales reps need while you're learning and changing?
You eat that frog. I mean, like, that's the reality. Like, you don't get big and strong without going to the gym. You don't become a successful salesperson without doing the thing, the little things. Very successful people are typically pretty boring individuals. Their day looks the same because it's these little monotonous things that make them successful. But day in and day out, that's where the wins come from.
Right.
And so, again, carving out the time, right? Like, sales is important. You got to focus on it. Keeping that top of funnel full is important, but that's simpler and even more monotonous than closing business, right? There's a lot more nuance to once somebody's raised their hand to get them actually across the finish line than there is to getting somebody just to raise their hand and give permission to enter that sales conversation.
Right.
So through your delegation, you'll have more time to then earmark for leadership, for creating process, for training process, and then giving your reps enough access to you to bring up the conversations you weren't expecting. Right.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about, let's shift gears maybe a little bit and talk about sales effectiveness. I mean, you know that I'm a big believer in follow-up. I've said many times, look,
it's almost like you built a business on it.
Yeah, that's right. I've said many times, I hope that on my gravestone, right after it says he was a great husband and dad, it says follow-up works. please follow up. It really will grow your business. But how do you, and the whole point is, I know you've talked a lot about this. What about the people who aren't ready today? Most of the people that you come across whether it's in a marketing conversation, a sales conversation, the timing's not right. That's the reality. Even if you get the fit right and you're talking to a qualified prospect, most of the time it's not right. The timing isn't there. So what thoughts do you have in terms of putting timing on the side of the sales rep or the business owner that's trying to get that cadence right with the prospect, so that they're not bugging them with too much follow-up, but they're also giving the appropriate amount of follow-up so that they are there when the customer's ready? Yeah,
absolutely. Because one reality is that, like, in most businesses, like 7+ touches is what it takes to get a prospect to each stage of their sales process. If it's a two meeting sales process, it might be 7 to 10 touches just to get the first meeting, and then if you're smart enough to schedule forward, and then that meeting falls through, it might be 7 to 10 touches to get it back on the calendar to make sure it happens. Right? So, like, you have to follow up. You can't shy away from it. Just continuing to show up is key number one. But, as you learn more about what people care about, what questions they're going to have, what objections they're going to have, you can start to drip that storyline out through your follow-up. Hey, on average it takes me 7 to 10 touches to get the first meeting. Here's the thing that might get some people over the line. If they don't say yes to that, they're going to have, their objection is going to be this, and then their next objection is going to be this, and their next objection is going to be this. So every time you call, every time you email, every time you send them something in the mail, like, it's a new bit of that story. And that seems to help move more deals forward without having the negative reaction of, you're just annoying me.
Right. Yeah, and that's the trick. And what I've found is that most people err very much on the side of not following up enough.
Correct.
There is the scenario of sometimes following up too much and not doing it in the right personalized way. But for most business owners and initial sales reps, they take 1 or 2 bites at the apple. You know, they try a couple of times and then it's just it's gone on to the next thing. And for entrepreneur business owners, it's usually because they're trying to do so many different things. They've got so many things on their plate. They're wearing all the hats. They're the, you know.
So the other part of that, just like being able to carve out time in your day to be a leader, to create process, to reinforce process, to have proximity to your sales reps so that there's open communication to overcome problems you weren't expecting, is organization. You have to be organized. Have a plan, you know, create reminders. If you're using a CRM, use it to create the next steps. You know, never move on from a prospect without knowing what's the next step. If they don't meet the micro commitment we talked about in our last conversation, what am I going to do, again, if they fail to meet that commitment? When is it going to happen? Make that plan. It's probably going to look pretty similar from prospect to prospect with then small variation, the personalization you're talking about.
That's right. And that's, I mean, you're obviously now you're speaking my language entirely. This is getting organized, following up, and then automating that. And you can do that with campaigns that are very consistent with what your prospects experience.
You can delegate to people, and you can delegate to software.
That's right. That's right. And you can delegate to software in very personalized ways where you can turn it off. Okay, they responded. You know, but it makes it possible for you to do that tedious follow-up work. That's the difference of making those 7 touches or not making those 7 touches, bringing in that customer, making that sale or not. And so I'm glad you brought up the organization.
Well, and there's there's a good example of that, right, is when I'm helping people create their prospecting playbook and their prospecting cadences, right, like we're using multiple channels. We're using social, we're using email, we're using phone, we might be using live events to move the conversations forward, right? And so it's not just all email or all phone, it's phone, email, phone, social, event, right? Like we have different tools in the tool belt, and some of those we can automate, right? I mean, we can even automate voicemails, right?
Right.
Yeah,
Well, glad.
be strategic.
Yes, there you go. Thanks for bringing that up. So let's talk for a second about the reality that for, you know, all of the great plans that we make as business owners, entrepreneurs, sales leaders to hit sales goals, you know, sometimes it doesn't happen, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes you're not hitting those goals. And I think especially right now is we've got audience members who are looking at their 2019 and some of them just didn't go the way they wanted to, and they're getting set up for 2020. How do you rebound? How do you adjust when, you know, this is very common for sales managers. They've got a goal, and you know, each month or each quarter, or you know, however they're measured on, they're having to kind of put the plan back together. So what thoughts do you have for when it doesn't go well and you didn't hit your goal, and maybe your sales reps are kind of looking at you like, you know, is this going to work? And why should I believe we're going to do that if we couldn't do this? Or maybe you don't have sales reps and it's just you, and you're looking at it saying, gosh, I thought we were going to do 500,000 this year, and we only got to 387. You know, how do you rethink that?
So, I mean, that's tough, right? Because it requires honesty. And people are terrible at honesty, and we avoid it just as much as we avoid making phone calls. But yeah, you have to be honest with yourself. If you're a solopreneur, if you're a small team, usually the problem is volume. You're just not working hard enough, you're not making enough dials, you're not going to enough events, you're not talking to enough people to learn the lessons you need to learn to get better at targeting, to get better at prospecting that people respond positively to. And so again, it's honesty, right? Be honest with yourself. If you don't know if you're being honest with yourself, get some outside counsel. You know, my brother reminded me of a blog post I wrote years ago that he stumbled across on social, and it was like, you know, find your church, find people who are a positive influence on you that can introduce you to ideas and hold you accountable, right? Like that's what my mastermind is. Like that's what other people have masterminds. Some people have, you know, just really close friends and family, fathers who will call them out and tell them you actually have to sell if you're going to talk about selling, right? So you get some outside counsel, find some people, and just like you're trying to reinforce or have proximity and regularity with your proximity to your sales team, have a regular cadence when you have exposure to that group that can hold you accountable so that you can be honest with yourself.
So that honesty, that accountability. A lot of times what happens, I've watched with entrepreneurs, is the years going by and they're not having the conversation consistently. So they're not doing enough volume to get the sales. They're not making the calls, doing that work that's necessary. And it's not because they're sitting around doing nothing. It's they're doing a bunch of other stuff, right? But I think doing the work, having the honest conversation with yourself and with others, being accountable to it.
Yeah.
I think the other thing that I see a lot of times is that honesty is not being grounded in, do we have the right solution? Have we done the things that we need to so that we're getting demand that's pulling us, as opposed to, we're trying to push this really hard. I think that's a key part of the honesty. And what I see a lot of times is business owners even if they're at that honest place and they have that accountability, maybe they have a mastermind, but they're not. There's something off in their pricing and their packaging.
Pricing, product market fit, like you absolutely, cool technologies do not build great businesses. Like, yes, it can be cool, but if there's not a need today that people say, yes, I have this need, and if the price is right, I'm going to buy it. Right. Like, your business is going nowhere. Right. You need people who are sales qualified today to build a business, and then yes, as you continue to encounter marketing qualified leads as opposed to sales qualified leads, like, yes, put them in your CRM, have a follow-up cadence, circle back to them when the time is right. Be honest with yourself, about your process, how hard you're working, and if in fact there is a need with the people, if your solution meets a need of the people you're talking to.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for sharing that. So we've got a question here I wanted to hit. The question is, what's your suggestion to support clients to make the time commitment to learn the tool that supports their sales pipeline? So I think this is let me just say that I have dealt with this challenge many times, both with our customers, because we have a tool that supports our customers' sales pipeline. And so I think I've also dealt with it with our own salespeople. I think the question really is, okay, well, how do you make sure that the salespeople are going to learn the tool that they need to in order to use the process, whether that's Keap or Salesforce.com if you're in a bigger company, or whatever. The reality is, when you've got a process in place, you have a system that helps you run that process, and your people need to be committed to that system. So have you seen that challenge where you can't, either you're not committing the time to it, or your sales reps are like, we're not doing this, whatever. How do you deal with that?
I mean, your top performers are going to be resistant to anything, right? Because they have their process, right? And I've definitely been in roles where I was the worst user of the CRM, simply because it wasn't built to accommodate my process, and that's what technology should do, right? And there's some really successful CRMs out there that like Salesforce.com hit the market, and it was a great managerial tool. It wasn't a great sales tool, right? And so people weren't getting on the full value out of it.
Or a small business tool.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. And so one thing is, pick your tool that's going to inspire your salespeople to want to use it. If it enables their process, if you can connect the dots, you got to sell them on it, right? It has to be. If you can find a way to make using the CRM their idea, they're going to use it more.
Okay, that's great. And specifically, I totally agree that they've got to be bought into it, and it's got to be flexible enough that it's working for them, right? There's also just a time commitment to it, and I know sometimes that's a little tricky. And so
little small steps.
Yeah.
Right. Like when I'm working with brand new salespeople, like one thing we want to do is get them on the phone as quickly as possible. Yes, there's things they have to learn before that, but they don't need to learn how to close business to set appointments. Yeah. Right. And so take it a step at a time. They don't need to learn all of the CRM. Like they don't have the attention span to sit through that. Right. So take it a piece at a time. What's important for the piece of the sales process that they're learning, and then continue to reinforce it, and make it mandatory, right? Don't take too much time revisiting things that are a waste of time. If you're a sales manager or a trainer, like, you can pick smaller groups of people to focus on what they need to learn right now. Yeah. Right. Great. And then get organized and stay consistent.
Yeah. That's really good. And it is that as a leader, you have to set the expectation that we're going to do this. We need you to learn this. We're going to give you some time to do it, and then make sure that happens. Okay, so what's the one area? The question says, what's the one area of organization that always catapults a company to next level growth? Well, I wish it were that easy, that it's one thing that always works. But is there something that you would say? I think the point is, what's something that you really focus on to catapult next level growth?
So we talked about being honest, and organization. The other thing is like, you know, being honest with what you prioritize, putting first things first. You know, we talked about timing and why we need to follow up with prospects. Like the reality is, just like our customers have a checklist of things that are important to them, and we might be 5, so they need to check off 1 through 4 before they're going to buy from us. Like we need to be thinking about running our business in that same manner.
Yeah, that's really great. So getting prioritization right, especially when you're an entrepreneur, you're wearing all the hats and you're running like crazy. You've got to make sure you're taking that time to get clear on the priorities, what matters most. So that's the one thing I would say, not to use the name of the book, The One Thing, that is all about that. So if you wanted to check out The One Thing, it actually speaks to that. I will say one thing that's not necessarily what, you know, I think the question was what's the area in terms of organization. But I would say if you're trying to catapult next level growth, here's what I've seen over and over and over with our customers. That there is something that I see that creates a step function in growth. And that's when you go from one-to-one sales to one-to-many sales. And you can do that either through group sales settings, through online social settings where you're making an offer, you know, and you're talking to many people at once and making an offer that you know, multiple people can jump into. But another way that you do that is through partners, where you're going one-to-many through partners. And so what the principle is, when you're just doing one-to-one, you're going to refine your message, you're going to get better at it, you're going to grow your business as you get more successful. But when you can take that leap to do one-to-many, there is a step function change in your growth.
Absolutely, absolutely. So one thing to remember, though, is it's those one-to-one conversations that help you set the foundation. So you know what works, you learn the conversation, you learn the objections, so that when you do speak one-to-many, it lands. Because the thing about speaking one-to-many is you get one shot. There's no, like, you know, one-to-one sales is more like wrestling or jujitsu, right? It's hand-to-hand combat. The way I sell to you is not the same way I'm going to sell, you know, the next 3 people are going to care about different problems that my one solution can fix, right? And so I'm going to have different conversations with them. And so, you know, as your organization grows, now each of you become a persona, and I can have one-to-many conversations with one persona at a time.
Yeah, if you don't do that, stated another way, if you don't do that sales R&D of the one-to-one, you end up doing one-to-many and you create all kinds of messes. Because you send partners off in the wrong directions, you have a conversation online or social and you create a bunch of stuff where you have no ability to meet those expectations. You do something.
You outspend your runway.
So thank you for that word of caution, because lest our audience member who asked that question goes running off right now, not having done the sales R&D. Make sure you do the R&D first. Don't pass go until you've done that work and you know what resonates.
I mean, there's a lot of beauty in digital marketing, but one thing to remember is that you know, digital marketing done well is really just replicating and repeating what happens in a one-to-one scenario.
Yes, well said. That's great. Good stuff. Well, thank you for. I think our time's up. We're getting the hook.
Oh, we could do another 2 more hours of this, right?
So thank you for all that you've shared, your expertise, your background, your wisdom, and the things that you've learned in your years in sales. And congratulations on starting Phoenix and all that you're doing there.
Appreciate it.
You know, why don't you, for people that want to get to know you a little bit better or learn more about you, where can they go to learn more?
So folks can go to startinphoenix.com, or, you know, I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Facebook. Send me an invitation to connect. Let me know you saw me here, and I'll be sure to accept.
Great, Brendan. Thanks so much. And of course, if you want to get more organized and follow up and automate a lot of that sales process, there's nothing better than Keap. Come on, let's be honest. It is awesome. Hopefully, you'll be able to hit your goals next year, whatever you're using to drive sales. And I hope that this discussion we've had together has been helpful for you. Kill it in 2020 and keep going, keep serving, keep growing.
That was fun, man.
All right, that was great. Thank you.
Yeah.